Please note that the following story contains details that some may find distressing. As the war in Sudan continues, some civil rights or civil society groups have warned that the risk of sexual violence is so severe that some women are reportedly taking their own lives. Women in that country commit suicide to escape being raped by armed militia as the conflict has increased risks of sexual violence and forcing many women have heightened to forcing many women and children to flee. Now, the struggle for power between the army and the RSF has killed tens of thousands of people and forced more than 11 million people from their homes since the conflict began in April 2023. But let's now speak to Mohamed Osman, who is Human Rights Watch Africa's division researcher. Mohamed, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. We're hearing over 100 women having committed suicide in order to escape sexual violence. Have you got the data on that?
So what's happening in the region of Al Jazeera State in central Sudan since October 20 speaks volume to the sheer brutality that the rapid support forces have been inflicting on civilians, but particularly women. It has been very difficult to have real-time information given also the limitations of the telecom network, but also, according to some of the activists in the area, the rapid support forces have been confiscating the few Starlink devices, which has been crucial in allowing information to reach, outside of the region. The organization named Strategic Initiative for the Women in the Horn of Africa have confirmed several cases of rape and gang rape, but also the suicide being committed by survivors. According to them, we are still yet trying to verify the numbers, but it's definitely everyone I spoke to from that area kept talking about how sexual violence committed by the rapid support forces has been clearly widespread.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the reports are over 130 women having committed suicide. And I mean, you can talk about, how big that data really is. But what kind of work is being done on the ground by civil society organizations, the likes of Human Rights Watch, for instance, to try and bring an end to this and bring some comfort, if at all, to these women?
So if you look at the situation since the start of the conflict last year, right, we are witnessing a global negligence and regional negligence as well about the conflict. Sudanese are left alone. We're talking about grassroots organizations, frontline responders, such as the emergency rooms, are the only lifeline for millions in Sudan. The two warring parties actively obstructing aid access from the UN and other organizations, but we are also not really seeing the global and the regional concerted action to bring an end to the abuses committed. We're not seeing accountability. I mean, just a few days ago, the UN fact-finding mission issued its report on sexual violence in Sudan throughout the conflict, and adds also very concerning details around the trends from rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, child marriage, forced marriages as well. Sudanese women and girls in particular have been taking the brunt of this conflict for quite some time.
Yeah, and from a leadership point of view, is this an issue that's being looked at? So if you look at government and the army itself, whether or not it is something that is even discussed in Sudan, the sexual violence against women and even children.
So the discussions around sexual violence has been there for quite some time. I mean, Sudan has brutal civil wars wherein sexual violence and rape being used as a weapon of war. We can always remember and talk about what has happened in Darfur in the early 2000s. The cases of rape, for example, Human Rights Watch documented in Khartoum last year, we also found cases being committed by the army. We have not seen the authorities affiliated with the army, including the Attorney General Office, showing any indicators they are investigating cases of sexual violence at all. They have very limited access for survivors for legal and safe abortion, for example. The army is blocking access of aid, including important medications for survivors of sexual violence. So even if most of the cases committed by the rapid support forces, the government is really doing nothing per se to help survivors, provide access to them, or allow safe access for the survivors to reach the aid and the medical and psychological care they need.
Yeah, and that's concerning. And then, of course, you've got reports from international media looking at how, according to these reports, RSF and allies sexually abusing victims from the ages of 8 all the way up until the age of 75. So there's a sense that, there isn't an age range where one is safe here, which is obviously even more frightening. What's the call by Human Rights Watch?
So the call has been for quite some time. It's for the United Nations, UN Security Council, and the African Union to really work together to bring Sudan to the list of priority, on the top of the list of the priority. We are not seeing that has been happening. The African Union in particular had its own legacy on Sudan in the past. The African Union now is missing in action. We want these regional international bodies to sit down together, develop options on how to protect civilians, including deployment of physical civilian protection mission in the country. As you just said, no one is safe in Sudan. We cannot trust the warring parties to protect civilians. We do need the level of regional and international intervention to protect civilians on the ground.
Yeah, we're talking about tens of thousands of people that have lost their lives in over a year, and 11 million people that have been displaced. What needs to be done about what you mentioned earlier, of this conflict almost being left alone, right, and not being looked at by the international community? How much of that has to do with a lot of the attention really going to, for instance, Ukraine versus Russia, or what's happening in the Middle East, and very little resources and attention being given to Sudan, in your view?
I mean, it's definitely in the heart of the problem is the double standards. We have seen the world react differently to other crises with level of priority and engagement, high level engagement. We're not seeing that in Sudan. For example, even if you looked at what's happening in the Middle East, for example, if you saw the roles of South Africa, putting the case in front of the National Court of Justice, the role of Gambia bringing cases against Myanmar for genocide, we're not seeing that level of attention from the continent itself to what's happening in Sudan. So I think there is a level of crisis happening in different places, double standards we're seeing from the rest of the world. But this is, I have to say, there is still time to correct course and engage and show the world, Africans care about their own continent, about their own people, because the world, to an extent, see the conflict in Sudan as another black people killing other black people kind of conflict.
Yeah, we certainly did see the South African government, for instance, taking the matter of the war in Gaza very seriously, going all the way to the International Court of Justice, wanting the war in Gaza to be declared a genocide. I bring that up because as you speak to a South African audience, what is it that you want South Africa to do and say at this time?
So South Africa has the role to lead. For instance, we have seen South Africa voted positively at the UN Human Rights Council to renew the mandate of the fact-finding mission. This is a positive step, but we need to see more South African engagement with the region, with the African Union, with the United Nations, to really push the case for civilian protection as an African priority. No one wants to see this as a Western project. And this is the role where South Africa can come in politically to invest into the engagement on Sudan and the need to protect civilians, as I mentioned, including dispatchment and deployment of forces on the ground.
Yeah. Mohamed Osman there, thank you so much for speaking to us. He's, of course, with the Human Rights Watch, and a horrific, really concerning story, obviously, that needs a lot more attention on the continent. Of course, with the ongoing violence in Sudan, over 100 women have committed suicide in order to escape sexual violence as a weapon of war. We'll keep going back to that story, certainly. But thank you so much for speaking to us, Mohamed. We really do appreciate it.